Welcome everybody to Rendezvous. Today we're going to talk about justice and or I want to kind of think it through, um, and share some thoughts, dig into it. So justice basically being what should happen, I guess, and when what should happen happens. So you're like, yeah, that's justice. What should happen happens. Or you say that's not justice. Justice is over this some other ideal thing which isn't being met. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I think basically, in a nutshell, I think people say life isn't fair. I don't agree with that. I think life is perfectly fair, actually. On a, well, I think it's both. Like most deep, probably any deep question, the answer isn't yes or no. It's both, yes and no. That includes any boundary. Like, ultimately all boundaries are um, hypothetical because everything's just one soup of energy or consciousness or whatever it is, the being of existence. So all boundaries, saying both to a deep question, is basically acknowledging a boundary while transcending it, like saying, yes, that's useful in a certain level of analysis. So yes, I have, a torso and then limbs and a head, but but yes, there's just one body, It's not which is it? Well, it's both. Or am I made of chemicals or am I made of elements? Well, both, I'm made of elements and then they're combined into molecules. They're combined into like organs. You know, so there's different levels you can analyze it at, and it depends on the context, which level is more appropriate to analyze it at. So, and then sometimes say examples of where that could come intersect with justice is, which pops into my head here, is say like, oh, this person is doing, is it their someone's done something wrong, like say some white guys, killed some ethnic minority in America or something. Is that a symbol? Does that prove there's this white supremacist culture, or is that just like one person? What's the right point of analysis? Is it the individual or the collective? Um, but so certain times it would be both. Like say Nazi Germany, some guy does that. Okay, well, yeah, the collective definitely is like white supremacist, as well as that particular individual. But I'd say America isn't white supremacist in general. But anyway, so I think life isn't fair. Clearly, on some level, there's so many bad things that happen, and so many things which just feel just so wrong, and you think them through, and they they're still wrong. Doesn't make any sense. It's not good. Um, but and basically, it causes suffering, needless suffering, and especially suffering for people who are kind of, I guess more or less people who are doing what we should do, people who are living in harmony or abiding by natural laws, the laws of nature, which basically is love and harmony and creativity and the flourishing of life, a more bountiful life, letting things evolve. And there's some room for cooperation. Sometimes, hey, you're in my turf. We got to like have a little battle for space. That's natural. But in general, trying to maximize the flourishing. So that means not just being like a cancer, not, oh, it's just me and I'm going to grow as much as I can. No, try to create something interesting as a whole, and that takes a certain amount of sacrifice of your own, some things you might want, but oh no, but if I let that go, we can all have this better thing. Okay. Um, and I think, basically in a nutshell, justice or injustice would be like when people are being, it's not just like people being harmed, but when people are being, because you might say, oh, someone's there's an avalanche. Would you say, oh, that's an injustice? How dare that mountain? No, it's kind of like when you feel like there's someone who has the ability to encourage harmony and they are for some reason not encouraging it. They're going in another way. They're seeking a good which is exclusionary. Um, and so, yeah, but I think I'm going to sing a little song, which I'm going to make up, um, or someone's going to make up uh, on the spot, about justice, and then going to get into basically why do I think that justice is like life is fair actually, and the perfection of life, the justice, and then also the to in what way it's not fair, and kind of get into the thing of discrimination, oppression, these kinds of things, but also kind of talk about little interesting details. I think of sometimes people they're on the right track, like yeah, we need to deal with this problem, but then they've got the wrong solution, or their solution is itself unjust, um, so and I guess yeah. All right. So, and then, and what else? I did write some notes this time because I want to do it justice, which is an interesting phrase, meaning I want to make it as good as it can be or as good as it should be. So I guess it comes back to when what should happen happens. Um, so, yep. All right. Cool. Justice, 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 justice is just this. Ooh, justice is just this, that whatever should be will be and is. Hold high and holy what comes into the world and unfurls its wings to fly anew. Justice, 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 whatever should happen to be, whatever is, justice. Take that, whatever 12 ways you want. So let's see. Yeah, there's a quote from the Buddha, old mate Siddhartha Gautama, which is amazing. Where it's something to the effect. Back, tiny note. When I say the Buddha, a lot of people imagine some sort of angel or something, or someone who's not real, but was a real person. There's all this incredible philosophy, which is like it's like some engineer the level of Nikola Tesla appearing thousands of years ago. Where are all the giants whose shoulders you're apparently standing on? Someone like that, but just in terms of wisdom in general, and giving sound advice, silent advice as well. It just appears out of nowhere. So, and there's a historical record as well. But anyway, so not some magical angel cloud of mist. Also not some huge fat man made of gold. That was like the Chinese, as far as I understand it, the Chinese symbol of abundance, because, it used to be hard to get fat. You have to be very wealthy. And so, very skinny, poor people being, oh my God, it's hard to make a living in, against the ravages of nature. They would be, oh man, imagine like being really fat, that's the symbol of like extreme success, right? And so I guess the wisdom of the Buddha kind of found, so the Buddha wasn't some fat dude, as far as I know. But I believe he was just, and the Malaysian kind of Buddha, or like just the normal actual, not just Malaysian, but the normal Buddha things you would get, say, in India or other places. It's like a slim, just, balanced body or whatever. But the abundance of his wisdom, right, came to be considered like, oh yeah, big fat man laughing, As far as I understand it, that's what the story. Anyway, so the Buddha's some guy who's called Siddhartha Gautama, and he's very, very wise. And he's got some amazing quotes. If you ever just look up, Google images, just Buddha quotes, and there'll just be like starry sky with like some quote or whatever. Blow your mind, blow your socks off. And there's something to the effect of, when you realize how perfect everything is, you will tilt your head up to the sky and laugh from your belly, or something. You tilt your head up and laugh at the sky, something like that. And which I thought was just so beautiful. Like, just like, what can you do with your laughter? Just, the maximum mirth possible is just to give yourself to the sky and just like sharing your laughter with heaven. Um, and how perfect everything is. Not just when you realize that everything is perfect. And usually we think of perfect as an absolute, it's perfect. Can't be more perfect than perfect. But he's saying how perfect everything is, which I think is kind of dissolving the boundary kind of thing itself. Transcendent language is kind of coming from this other dimension beyond the strict boundaries that like kind of intellectual thinking can put up. But I think he's trying to kind of communicate, or almost like a poetic sense, where there's some twist of language where you're breaking a rule, but it's kind of adding a certain other type of communication. For example, like another thing would be, before Abraham was, I am, or whatever that thing is, where it's talking about, from the Bible, I guess, kind of talking about kind of the eternal dimension of like the present moment, saying, so there's mentioning the chronological time before Abraham was, I am, not I was, but like I am. So kind of trying to get the reader to understand, like, or the listener, like, oh, there's this time is an illusion, right? And or it's both. It's a phenomenon, but it's an illusory phenomenon. So the Buddha is saying how perfect everything is, and I think it's kind of my reading of that. It's kind of that basically it seems like on the surface, oh, life is not fair. There's all these things that shouldn't be happening, and they happen. But then eventually you start to realize there's a way out of that. Say Buddhism is like the Buddha called enlightenment the end of suffering. Literally, he's like, what's this enlightenment thing you're talking about? The end of suffering. You suffer, right? Or you're perfectly happy. You're perfectly relaxed all the time. Interesting. Most people aren't. What about you, Gary? What about you, John? Kelly? Anne? What about, I'm pretty fucked up, and so, okay, we're suffering. Yeah, the end of that. That's what he was talking about. And so, oh, great news. There's a way out of it, out away from all these bad things. But then you kind of get to a point where you realize, oh, wait a minute, I need those bad things to be able to make me get to the good things. So it's kind of good in a way, the bad things also. Or you might go, oh, the bad things, I want to stay away from them. So that gives me a motivation to kind of stay to the good things. All right, so they're kind of good in that way also. And you might start noticing some kind of extrinsic things that are good about the bad things. And then, you might start to notice, well, wait a minute. Imagine everything was fine from the beginning. There's no bad things. What kind of stories could you have in that environment? Like, Matthew walked in here, went in his spaceship, to wherever he wanted, and he met whoever he wanted, and he did whatever he wanted. And okay, then what? It's kind of like, to have an interesting story, you want that balance between, of yin and yang. And just like music goes between order and chaos, a bit of surprising things changing. Ooh, what's that? What's going on now? That kind of refreshes it and keeps it interesting. Same with almost everything. Your friends who, you love and they love you, and you share your interests, you have a good time together. Having a little argument every now and then can actually make the overall thing better. Not like you should seek it out, but maybe you should be open. It's almost like, this is just an example that pops into my head, but being able to negotiate those differences and even be able to get angry at each other or walk away or whatever. And then you come back like, hey, are we good? Or whatever, you could see that could actually enrich the experience of a friendship, where you're like, yeah, my friendship can take that. It can hold that could actually, then when you're having a good time, both you can relax because, hey, yeah, if we, get annoyed at each other, right, that's fine. We just, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Like, that's nothing to be afraid of. We've dealt with that before. And also you can enjoy like this greater contrast. no sweet without sour kind of thing. Like if you've had those, or people who have been very depressed, when they're just regular happy, they appreciate it much more maybe than people who just have had easier lives, so to speak. So you might start feeling, yeah, like, okay, actually the bad, if there was no bad, then it would kind of be no good. Like, how would you enjoy the good? It wouldn't really be. And so you can start to appreciate on that there's an intrinsic good to the bad. And then also, like, I did an episode on suffering, why suffering is your friend, which I think is literally true. Although it tries to mess you up. It's kind of a complicated relationship, your mind. You have to be very, you want to be like, they say the mind is the perfect servant, but a lousy master. So yeah, you want to be the top in that relationship. No, but so of course, I think suffering. You want to live your life. It's not very pleasant. It's not very healthy, and many people are suffering. And this is kind of what we're talking about here. Like justice. We'll get into that. Like why is suffering bad, or like how does that connect to justice? Um, but yeah, so alleviating suffering, good idea, well established. You think it through basically I think if you think it through logically, you come up to either 50-50, yeah, it's about as good an idea as not doing it at the very least. Trying to alleviate suffering, it's at least as good an idea as not alleviating suffering. And then there's all these intuitive reasons and traditional reasons saying you should. Experience says good things happen when we alleviate suffering, bad things happen when we don't. And okay, so the weight of evidence is definitely in favor of, and even a nihilist, I think, doesn't have any arguments against any valid arguments against that. Why just? But we'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, so I think so. It's good for the story. You need the negative to have the good. You need polarity. However, I think also, yeah, like suffering teaches us and allows us to grow, allows us to evolve. And so that in that episode, I was kind of talking about how like I had this realization at one point where I kind of just had this sense of like, yeah, the perfection of everything. It was kind of overwhelming. Like, wow, everything's just incredibly, like the justice of this system. I had this image almost of like overlapping, interlocking, concentric or spheres, just like wheels within wheels or something. Just these, but there's just these balances of phenomena flowing between opposites. You got for every phenomenon, you've got the virtue in the middle, like courage, and then you've got the vice of deficiency and the vice of excess. So not enough, you're a coward. Too much, you're reckless, and you're gonna do things that are silly and foolish. Too much, kindness is a virtue. Too much, and you're too much kindness, I guess. Yeah, you could be coddling people, or you could be not protecting people around you or yourself enough, not independent enough, too little, and you're mean. You could say spineless also for too much kindness. But anyway, like these phenomena, just like every phenomenon you can imagine, just being experimented in through every moment by all these different sentient beings and all these interacting, interloping, interconnecting, flowing situations through space and time, where all these scales and continua of phenomena are being expressed and experienced, and just that we learn interacting, multiplying, addition and multiplication of these phenomena, and division. I don't know, but and it just had this sense like, oh, it's incredible complexity, but it seems like there's this overall order to it, this justice, in that basically anytime you're out of line or someone else is out of line, it creates conflict, and it creates imbalance, and that is going to eventually cause suffering. And when suffering gets significant enough, people notice it. And then when it gets even more significant, people are forced to, like, okay, I have to deal with this. And to deal with it, they will, like breadcrumbs, they will follow the trail back and kind of find where it came from. And it leaves, clues, and you can retrace the path and kind of go, oh, this happened because that, and then that had happened because of that, and then because, oh, I think that happened either for one of these three reasons, and you look into them, and you can start to find things where eventually, oh, I was out of balance here, or that person was out of balance there. So what does that mean? What should I do, or what should I tell them? Is it maybe they need to change something, or maybe I need to not hang out with that kind of person, or whatever it is. And so you and others, if they're doing it, and if you're communicating together, can learn these lessons, which you would never learn if you didn't have that alarm of suffering, kind of like, the thing when you're going off the road, like, whoa, whoa, I'm going off the road, like a stupid thing making that noise. You're like, no, thank God, I was going off the road. So suffering is basically telling you where your lane is, and like, hey, this is the balanced way, this is the happy path, the path of wisdom and well-being. And so when you realize that, it's not just that we need to have an interesting story and an interesting life and adventure, that you need polarity and you need good and bad, but also that in order to grow, suffering is our greatest teacher. And Eckhart Tolle says, suffering is the one spiritual teacher everyone has. Even if you think you're all, the most nihilist cat in the alley, try to dodge your suffering, I don't think you can until you accept it and you embrace the present moment. And that's spirituality, basically. Like Buddhism, just notice how being attached to outcomes, like, oh, I basically wishing you could control what you can't control, as Epictetus would say, in Manual for Living, being like, oh, I can control this. All right. And then I do what I want. Great. Or I can't control this. And I okay, then you need to go, okay, I'll just let it go. I can't control it. But basically suffering comes from being attached to what happens. So, oh, I don't want this to come. And, oh, I want that to come. And then here's the thing, where an example of the boundaries of language, where the answer is both. It's okay to have desires. That's something which confused me. And maybe, I'm not sure about Buddhism, like back in the day, because I was like, but it feels like it's good to have desires, and you want to have a life and be here and have a story and an adventure. And I think it's true. There are desire. You can have healthy desires and aversions. Like, I don't want that. But the key is kind of like a Venn diagram, right? So or maybe it's like a circle within a circle. Actually, it's like there's the circle of desires, and within that, there's the circle of desires where you are accepting the present moment. And that's the healthy ones. So the small circle within the circle of total desires, the smaller circle, which is those desires which are, in alignment with the present moment. Like, I'm not resisting or rejecting or denying the present moment. Like, okay, yeah, this is what's going on. And yeah, I accept it. That's, and yeah, I understand. Okay, I'm with it. I'm still going to try to control whatever I think I can control and I think I should control. Yep, for sure. Oh, I want to change my shirt. I feel like changing my shirt. Do it. Go for it. What's the harm, Or, oh, I think I want to go talk to that person. Or I want to go, do anything. Okay, you can do it. Do it. Why not? So long as, and this is where it gets into justice. I think and like John Stuart Mill's idea of like, justice, like the golden rule, or it's more deeper, much deeper than that, I think, actually. But the golden rule, basically, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so, or treat others the way you want to be treated. But basically then there's this overlap area of again, we could use Venn diagrams as a metaphor. So your circle of freedom, there's someone else's circle of freedom. And sometimes they overlap where you can't both express your freedom. So then you have to figure out, okay, within that, how do we sort that out? Now, that overlap space, let's take that and create a new Venn diagram for it. All right. There is, how would that go? That would be, there is the overlap space where I guess my will should trump yours. Like, it's basically, it's more very clearly it's in my, yielding to my interest is the best way. Like, I'll get more benefit from that, and it's more reasonable, and it's better if we make that a general principle for society. It's better. Say, oh, you're smoking on the street, and I'm here with my baby. Like, okay, well, I can just fall back, or I can go a different way, or or I can ask you, would you put that out? Um, and so instead of saying, all right, no one's allowed to smoke on the street near babies, and then we have to have police going and surveilling everyone. That seems like, okay, no, probably, yeah, I'll yield to you here. I'll just fall back a bit, or I'll go ahead of you, overtake you, or I'll go a different road, or whatever. Or I talk to you and say, hey, would you mind going to the other side of the road? Or would you mind putting that out? Or so, and then there's other situations where flip side, it's like, okay, no, I should yield to you. So I'd say that's our circles. So our circles of what I want and what you want out of that overlap area, right? Now, the overlap of these two circles, I guess, would be where it's not clear whose interest should prevail, right? And it's not reasonably clear. And then I guess that's where maybe the law and tradition and just random chance and hope for the best comes in. Or when in doubt, be generous and be kind and think, is it necessary? Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Usually that's good for when you're saying things, but I guess it applies to doing things as well. So anyway, this would be the overlap of your wills, but we got into this because we were talking about what think suffering and what makes you happy. Oh, whatever, it doesn't really matter actually. I don't have to go. I won't retrieve that one from wherever it is. So but so we mentioned like the bad, like suffering, it's good because we need it to have the drama of existence. So it's actually, you can complain all you want, but you'd be complaining if you couldn't complain. You'd be complaining if you didn't have any negativity. Well, I guess it's a bit of a paradox, but I think, yeah, like you actually, if you zoom out, you can see that this is built into the nature of stories. And yeah, maybe we don't want too much chaos and suffering too much, but in general, you can understand that this overall, as a presence in the universe, it's actually a good thing. You need it for the stories to happen and to have that variation of the good guys, bad guys. How can love triumph if there's no opposition, if there's no bad guy, and how can you, if you don't have the freedom to choose to be bad, then what does it really mean to be good anyway? And so you can see, you can have this overall existential infinite good, the good that has no opposite, but then to have the drama of and the experience of the play of opposites and the freedom to choose to go the wrong way and then to come back home or whatever, to truth and love, that this is a beautiful, wonderful thing that we have that ability. And then also the second point of like that suffering teaches us. So that's kind of why, yeah, I think life is actually fair. Everything that happens, there's all these terrible things. People have disabilities. People, you're born with it, or it happens to you. People have relationships that go bad. People don't get what they want. People are sick. People die. People are robbed. People are persecuted. People are discriminated against. People fail. People miscommunicate. People make mistakes. People are narcissistic. People betray each other. People are faithless. There's all these awful experiences. But first of all, notice that that darkness makes the light of their opposites all the more luminous. So all the virtues, become much more beautiful and worthy and virtuous by virtue of vice, because of their opposites, through the existence of the darkness. So we have to reconcile those opposites and kind of like understand how they unite there. But these things are, they are there in the world. And so I think also, it's going too far to be like, okay, so everything's perfect, so just do whatever you want. And, oh, well, I'm a Buddhist billionaire, and yeah, I think everything's just like consciousness, everyone's immortal, eternal life. Like, they don't realize it, maybe a lot of these people, but like, yeah, we're souls, and we're just we're not going anywhere. We are the universe. There's nowhere to go, you know. Where would I go? Detroit? Uh, you know. Um, and so, oh, okay. So that means I can just play this game, and I think anyone would do it in my position, where I'm just gonna like, make myself king of the world and just build this empire. I really want to build a bunch of spaceships. I'm just gonna like, these people or whatever, they're doing stupid lives, they're just watching TV, and it doesn't matter that they've been led and shepherded into that for social control over decades of social engineering. They're into it anyway. And a small minority don't get into it, and they kind of find their other way. But so maybe them, it's different. But in general, everyone, yeah, whatever. I can sacrifice them, well, their bodies. It's just like a video game. I can just sacrifice them to my enterprise of building a global empire and building my spaceship fleet. That's what I want to do. You could see that you could take that in a bad way, where you're like, oh, everything's fine, everything's perfect, therefore I can just do whatever I want. So there is a balance there, right? Like, and again, it comes to the diagram thing, or understanding the value of other people's sovereignty and other people's experience, and how other people, like, the greatest glory you can achieve is to share glory, um, and to help others have their own triumphs and their own adventures, um, and to understand that me having 2x worth of adventure, is not as great as myself having 1x and someone else having 1x adventure together. That the same amount of pleasure, joy, experience, you know, shared, is actually, well, I would say, yeah, sharing that is much, much more glorious than 0x for them and 2x for me, you know? And yeah, so that the greatest, yeah, I think victory can have is if we're sharing victory, and we're allowing all kinds of, imagine all the nations of the world flourishing and prospering, all the families of the world, like, doing their own thing. They're not all the same. Some of them fight and shout and break glasses and, don't even like each other sometimes. And some people leave. And then others are, perfectly harmonious. Others are somewhere in the middle. But it's all part of the flow of things that goes on. But everyone's got enough food. There's not insane amounts of trauma and, terrible crimes going on. It's kind of a more reasonable drama. And we're in alignment with nature, and, there's technological flourishing and amazing miracles that we are creating through technology. And yet it's not overtaking our humanity and our connection to nature and ourselves and spirit. And, imagine like this beautiful world, like that is way better than like, some incredible experience for like a tiny elite, you know? Um, and you could argue that for logical reasons, but also just intuitively, like logical reasons, like, I guess, there's going to be, some, by sharing it out there, like we just know through experience, the economics and, all kinds of things, that when there's network effects, there's synergistic effects, and the sum is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so if you have a community, that's how human beings took over the planet, because we are decentralized networks, where we were able to work together. So we were able to outcompete all these animals, which are faster and bigger than us and stronger than us. So that would be a more logical argument for why, okay, yeah, having, spreading wealth, uplifting the whole world is far more glorious. And, if you want to use that word, because it might resonate with it, I don't know. I think it's a certain end of the spectrum, or you can say more beautiful or whatever, or more beneficial, than just a more extreme, achievement for a very thin sliver of people. And in time, ironically, by sharing it out, it's going to, give it away and it comes back to you, kind of thing, which applies to, say, spirituality, and cling to it and you'll lose it. And in general to things, although it's both are true, yes and no, in different contexts. But by sharing out prosperity of the world and helping encourage the whole world to develop, then over time we will have a far greater prosperity and flourishing than you could ever have by just cultivating an elite at the expense, like a parasite at the expense of the rest of the planet. But then, so that's a logical argument for, being nice. But then also just intuitively, of course, the image of the whole planet flourishing compared to a small elite, you can see like why, you might say logically like, oh yeah, I'm the Buddhist billionaire and everything's fine. Everything's just consciousness, doesn't really matter. And this is great for them. They're suffering, they're learning, they're going to learn through this suffering. It's great for them. I'm basically putting them on a diet or putting them on a gym regimen. They don't even know it, but hey, I'm their big daddy. That's fine. You could see, for one thing, that's not a very healthy mindset. And again, we could go into logical reasons for that. But just first of all, this time, intuitively, just like putting that one first this time around, it's just wrong. You can feel it's wrong in your heart. The head doesn't know that much. The heart knows more than the head. And the heart can be the only problem with the heart is when you're actually operating from the head, but you think it's the heart. So when you think your head is your heart, that can cause problems. Like you go, crimes of passion or something. That's not coming from the heart, that's coming from an emotionally supercharged ego mind structure. It's the mind. No one who is outside of their mind and just in their heart is going to be committing crimes because they will intuitively understand that their victim is actually themselves. And so then there's no impulse to do that, So yeah, so I'd say basically what we're getting at here is that everything is already just. Whatever happens, I think, you could say, yeah, I see what you mean. It's good, like, well, we can all learn things, but you're kind of just explaining it away, explaining away the problem. It's still not fair, right? And again, I would say yes and no. Like you can say it's not the ideal. The ideal is maximal flourishing. So in a way, that's justice, and anything less is not justice. But in a deeper sense, I think it's great to realize, well, it makes sense to go with the flow, and in your own life, and then collectively as a species and as nations and all that, and communities and families, just to go, all right, don't resist what you can't resist. That's insanity, Control what you can control and do it the way you think you should. Maybe you don't have perfect judgment, but do your best. And as you're practicing over time, you'll learn from your mistakes. If you never try to figure out what's right, then you're not going to develop your judgment. You're always going to be dependent on others. And the people you're dependent on, how do they know anything? The same thing you should be doing, which is just practice, trial and error, figuring it out. And in communities, through conversation, you can help each other understand and make progress there and accelerate your progress and record lessons through time, through generations even. And so, yeah. So, yeah. No. So, it is true that the world life isn't fair in some way, and that it could be better, and we should aim for that, and that the hypothetical Buddhist billionaire is not really Buddhist, is just getting confused about, or don't need to use Buddhist, use whatever you want, Taoist in the kind of more philosophical spiritual sense, or ultimately I think no label is the best, like spiritual or just no label, but like this is just often people who aren't so into the esoteric stuff, Buddhism might kind of convey the idea a bit better, I think. But you could say, Advaita Vedanta, I think even Sufism in Islam, kind of, and mystical Christianity, alchemy. There's all these ways which are basically getting at the same thing. The perennial philosophy, Aldous Huxley called it, like it's in every culture throughout time. The Toltec philosophy. Yeah, basically, the wisdom. So, but I'm calling it Buddhism, just but the kind of the awareness of oneness and the interconnectivity of all things, and therefore, and the purpose and the ethic and imperative of spiritual awakening being waking up out of the dream state of identification with thought and the false self that our thought seem to be us. And by understanding that we're kind of like an actor playing a character, and we've thought we are the character, and that's how we've been enculturated and trained to be, and everyone around us is doing the same thing. And not to be freaked out by that, because it can freak us out. Like, oh, that's weird. I don't like that sound. That sounds weird. I don't like that. That mustn't be true because it's weird. Yeah, maybe, or maybe it's weird and true. But to kind of awaken to this point of view where you see, oh, I'm actually the universe. I am everything, experiencing itself as this one person. And everyone else is doing that. And so ironically and paradoxically, we're one, but we're many. We are different because I'm here, you're there. You don't know what I'm thinking. I don't know what you're thinking. But nonetheless, in a deeper sense, we are all one. So that oneness and the awareness of love and the reality of that we are all, love is like understanding that we are branches of the same tree and that we're all here together. And we want to take care of each other and help us all grow. And that part of that growth for us and that joy is naturally just elevating our consciousness and alleviating suffering and following the path of wisdom and natural law and virtue, balance, vitality and well-being for all sentient beings. So I'm calling that Buddhism, right? And so the Buddhist billionaire dude, like, he might think, oh yeah, this is all fine, but in a way, yes, but in a way, no. You're I'm gonna have to, should I answer this phone? No, I shouldn't. You are more important to me, whoever's listening. So yeah, suffering is all acceptable on some level, but then on another level, yes, we should be people who talk about racism or, you know, the oppression of the military-industrial complex and war, and then, oh, what is Putin doing in Ukraine? All these things are valid on another level. But I think in order to interact with them in a healthy way, first you need to understand the bigger picture, which is that everything is perfect. And then within that, we can start to address the imperfection from a grounded place and a healthy place. And otherwise, I don't think it works, because time and again, you see well-meaning people and they just go off the path, go astray, I believe, because they're not grounded in this awareness of like basic things, like who are you, for example? Are you the voice in your head, or are you the light, the invisible, spacious light within which the movie of your life unfolds, including your head? Your head and your body are just, you know, you don't see your head, you know, do you? Can you see your face? What's going on there? Oh, are you in your head? Are you like a little dude sitting with the controls inside your head, behind your eyes, you know, cleaning, you know, with the windscreen wipers, cleaning the glass of your eyes so you can look out and peer on what's going on in the outside world? No, you're not in there, right? That's your brain and your own head. That also is an object within the field of your awareness. This is just a little tangent, just to maybe make you think, huh, wait a minute. Do I know who I am? Go investigate. Because if we don't know who we are, how the hell are we meant to know anything? If you, and I would say, especially because the advice and the judgments in the sense, both in the sense of, you know, well, that's wrong, and also in the sense of, oh, that's real, or, you know, right and wrong, and also like true and false, right? If you're, I would say that, yeah, the ego, which can be fine and normal a lot of the time, more or less, a bit dysfunctional, but pretty cool. But in extreme situations, when your emotions are really, you know, elevated, or, you know, kind of you're in stressful situations, or if you're in a position of great power and there's these temptations, then it gets way out of control and creates all these insane, terrible things. But but in normal circumstances, like, hey, you know, like, it's cool, whatever. Like, we're all in that most of the time. A very small number of the percentage of the population has transcended this false self. So I think we need to kind of acknowledge it and just, like, you know, stigmatize it and taboo it. and make people realize that it's even a thing first, but just help people see like, yeah, it's just the way it is. It's just we're growing up, you know, as a species. But yeah, so that's unhealthy in many ways, but you know, it's normal and it's fine. A lot of the, you know, most of the time it's just the way we are. We're humans, you know, we're kind of messed up. But you know, and it's a necessary stage of learning, so it's fine. It's cool. It's not a problem. It's an opportunity. More, it's truer to say it's an opportunity, rather than a difficulty. So, but that it will give you certain advice and judgments, and then your soul or your consciousness, free of that, if you can just watch your mind, settle into your body and your breath, and just be here, and just okay, you're settled. You're not in the stream of momentum of thoughts, and then let the thinking operate, and you kind of guide it with your feeling, you know. Then you will hear all this stuff coming up from much deeper, these insights of like, oh, and you'll have different judgments and different understandings, and you'll visually, like physically be able to see, you know, the light in someone else's eyes, and you'll be able to just notice things that you don't notice other when you're lost in thought. Your spiritual vision, your ability to just be here and in three-dimensional space rather than in the virtual reality of thinking, is elevated. And so, yeah, if how are you going to solve all the, to the extent that injustice is real, how are you going to solve it if you're not grounded in sanity, and if you're not even awake? You know, how do you know you're going to make good decisions? And so, all right. So segueing then into injustice, I'd say, yeah, look, so just some things about this, like, so racism, yeah, you know, there's racism for sure in the world. And I think, you know, throughout history, obviously the one, you know, really obvious example that comes to mind is, say, slavery in the United States. And, or at least for me and my culture and upbringing, you see, that's like an obvious example. And that was really awful, where human beings were sold as property and demeaned. And in order to justify that, it seems the conscience, because these people had guilty, the society seems to have had, most of the people in the society, a guilty conscience, which they had to repress about that. They then justified it through their culture, kind of like someone who walks the wrong way and their body adapts, and then they get like a, you know, a hump or whatever in their back. The culture kind of adapted to make space for this injustice, and then you have this kind of warped culture where they started to really believe that oh, these people were worse than us. And it does seem that apparently, like, the racism followed slavery, not the other way around. It was perhaps even just ironically that as the society in America was very prosperous, had a lot of resources, and limited government, which also tends to, and decentralized systems tend to be very effective at flourishing. And so they had a more decentralized system than the monarchies of the old world. And so they were able to become more prosperous, and therefore, you know, for those who wanted, which was most people, become more educated. And the more you're aware of, then the more, you know, the more knowledge you have, the more ability you have to start to become wise as well. I think you start noticing contradictions, you start noticing doorways, and knowledge doesn't equal wisdom. But it's perhaps what happened there, ironically, just thinking now, is that as the society was becoming more aware, they started to notice, ooh, the whole world engages in slavery, but is this really okay what we're doing? And then maybe they decided to keep doing it. And so they had to, ironically, their rising consciousness forced them to become more unconscious by, you know, kind of instilling and deepening, doubling down into this culture of like, oh, you know, the slaves are subhuman or whatever. But, you know, say the slave trade in Africa, you know, it wasn't white people, but just to put context on this, right? Like, racism, yeah, definitely existed there, but throughout, you know, the Roman, oh, I don't know about the Romans, but say the English in Ireland, you know, they were being extremely racist, saying, you know, like, they didn't see Irish people as the same ethnicity, you know, they were like, oh, you know, they're subhuman, and, you know, like literally, at least some people, I think that even categorizing Irish as like apes or something. Even Americans were doing that. Like some Harvard medical journal or something in the 1800s. I think that's right. I'm not sure. Anyway, and but you know, so basically you go, oh, hey, excuse me, sir. Oh, good morning, sir. How are you? Oh, I'm very well. How are you yourself? Oh, you're Irish. Ugh. You know, there'd be people, a lot of people who would be like, oh, and so this is racism, right? You know, as Martin Luther King said, well, he said, you know, we should judge people by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, which I agree with. That's the correct framing of how to be, you know, avoid the idiocy and injustice of racism. But so they would do the opposite. So that's just here where I am in Ireland. And then, you know, I'm sure Irish people were doing it, or I presume we're doing it to, you know, English people, we're doing it to others. Um, you know, obviously Germany was being you know, racist a little bit for a while. And then you know, Japanese doing it, in, you know, where there's, you know, even these days about, you know, Southeast Asian, you know, migrants, or in Korea, apparently there's a lot of racism against, you know, people who come to work there from Southeast Asia. But then they will be subject to racism in America. So, okay. And then, you know, white people, you can go to Vietnam, and apparently a lot of Americans, because of what the military industrial complex did to there, which was awful in Vietnam, a war for profit, basically. It was based upon a false flag event. We now know the Gulf of Tonkin incident. There was no real attack. They were just, you know, that is now 100% verified, as I understand it. So they were doing this awful, you know, spraying the forest, you know, killing everything so that the locals, freedom fighters, couldn't hide from them. And right, you know, understandably, there's resentment among the people there towards America, apparently. Now, I haven't been there, but I heard that apparently, I believe my brother told me this. I might be getting that wrong, but I think that apparently, yeah, there are people who will be racist against white people because they go, you are the people who, you know, did these awful things. And so there's a lack of discrimination in like the good sense. There's a lack of awareness, discrimination, differentiation mentally, to be able to see, oh no, you have the same color of skin as those people who did that, but you're not necessarily the same as them. And you know, like in Australia, there's racism against the Aboriginals, but then equally Aboriginals being racist against white people, being like, oh, you know, you white dog or whatever. Again, understandably, it's unfortunate and it's unhealthy, but I think naturally humans were in tribes, and so, you know, we were afraid of other tribes because they could kill you, because they're like, can we trust you? And we're like, can we trust you? So it seems like in often the tribes would just kill each other preemptively, or try to, because they couldn't quite trust. And so then it seems actually like capitalism basically solved these things. Perhaps, I don't know, but it seems like interconnectivity and being like, hey, we have this. We will give you some, we're leaving this food here. It's a goodwill gesture. And then the other people are like, oh, maybe they're not psychopaths. They're giving us food, but maybe they're trying to trick us. But let's give them some stuff. We'll give them some ale, and then we'll see what happens. Keep a close eye. And then interconnect, and then maybe trading and interconnectivity. We need you, you need us. Just like America and China having trade relationships helps cool things down from the, you know, the kind of political, geopolitical saber rattling and that kind of tension. Seems like actually interconnectivity helped us there. Um, but it seems we have this, you know, animals like boundaries, and we're not sure, are we going to get eaten or, you know, killed? So we're, you know, a bit jumpy. And so racism, you go, oh, you don't look like the people I know. That could be a problem because I can't predict you now. I can't predict your behavior. And there's a great cost if I make a single mistake. If I judge you, there's very little cost, right? Maybe I just miss out on a little opportunity, but there's plenty of other people I can connect with. But if I'm wrong and you like cut my throat in the night, then that's a big problem. That's game over. What are my children going to do? So you can see why there'd be this extreme carefulness with different groups, different people of different religions, different skin color, different languages, different systems, or whatever, different clothes. And then apart from that basic thing, then you have, you know, the revengeance thing and retribution, where people go, oh, you know, the English have been in Ireland for, you know, 800 years, therefore I should hate all English people. No, like there's a difference between normal English people, and then, you know, empire and colonialism and, say, even judging the aristocratic bloodlines, which kind of oversaw this stuff and didn't intervene and stop it, um, uh, and in all likelihood probably encouraged it for profit and their more narrow understanding of glory and advancement. Um, Even them, like, you can say, well, just because if this little baby is born a new prince into the family, maybe they're getting indoctrinated and enculturated, if you want to use a softer word, into that system, but but maybe not, and maybe not fully, and maybe they'll be sympathetic to issues, the cause of freedom and justice, um, and just because aristocrats 100 years ago were doing something, does that mean a given aristocrat now is doing it? Not necessarily. So you can't jump to conclusions. But I think what I'm saying here is, apart from the natural racism which is a defense mechanism against danger, and it's reasonable in more barbaric situations when everything's nice and easy. Okay, yeah, obviously it's like, not necessary, but you could see why in some situations, even you would probably be thinking twice about someone who looks different to everyone else. Because, if it's a more dangerous world, the stakes are higher, then you need to be more careful, and your openness needs to be, a little less open. And then the momentum of that doesn't just, I think there's a lag where, the momentum of these cultural approaches and attitudes and, systems, customs that and ideology and all that doesn't just change as soon as the environment changes. Oh, the world's safer. Like, it takes a while for things to kind of adapt, and that seems to be what's happening. Racism declining, violence declining. Steven Pinker's written about, I don't know, I haven't read his book, but 72 charts that showing like progress. Things are getting better, and in some ways they're getting worse, I think, but in many ways, yeah, it does seem that things are getting better. And as we've got more prosperity, people are chilling out and letting go of the old hostilities. But then you need to be careful, because things can change again. And then, if we're back in a barbaric time, solar flare from the sun knocks out the electricity grid, and we've got an apocalyptic scenario, who's going to survive? The people who are really careful. And maybe they're going to bring back some of those old prejudices in order to protect themselves. And so it's unfortunate, but you can understand it. And I think a great antidote to the raw emotion when you sense injustice is just to understand it, even if you don't approve of it. There's a difference between understanding and approving of something. And so, like, I think there's a lot of things that have happened, that happen in the world, and I don't like them, but I try to understand them, and I find that allows me to be more connected to that higher dimension of awareness of remembering we're all love, and not getting sucked into us against them mentality. Oh, the WEF is trying to, take away the freedom of the remaining free countries in the world, like, which have property rights and, limited government and oversight and that kind of stuff, and less, lower levels of corruption, and trying to bring in this, big brother state thing. It seems like that's kind of what's going on, right? I don't know, maybe that's wrong, but that certainly seems, to be fully frank, that's not the main point. But that, or, oh, this, woke culture, which seems like it's, out of balance and risking undermining our traditions and our structure of society, and well-meaning, but not operating from that place of love. So just causing chaos and problems and actually harming the people it's meant to be helping. China, the CCP doing things which are, I think are awful, like, China, cultural and seemingly more than cultural genocide of the Uyghurs and all this sort of stuff, like stuff where, it could be pulling me away from the oneness, and you could start, getting angry at people and having us against them psychology. But understanding helps ground yourself in justice and kind of see the bigger justice of, okay, this is all part of this big plan. It's helping us grow. And even that I'm being forced to accept these things helps me become wiser and more grounded. And then I can express more justice individually by accepting these things. So you can actually put it to use in your own life by carrying that burden and trying to accept it. And you'll either fail, like the gym, you do it to failure, or you'll fail, or you do it and it's a bit difficult, but then you get stronger. It gets easier next time. So yeah, So, and then, empire and so, but to go through things. So say like just a bit more specific now, like the details I want to talk about of like, justice and injustice as it's expressed. So people say, yeah, racism is a problem. Um, yeah, true. But the racism is all around the world, um, in Asia, like Chinese people being racist against Koreans. South Korea, according to Yeonmi Park, who's amazing, the voice of North Korea, she says, there's incredible racism against North Koreans in South Korea, and they're the same ethnic group, but the language is a little bit different now. It's kind of like diverged a bit even more than it had before. But it's only, since what, the 50s, I think early 50s, 51 or something like that, that they separated, into two countries. But people who would judge you and go, oh, you're from that group, and you could call that xenophobia if you want, but basically it's racism. That they're seeing them as, oh, you're another group, and based upon your ethnicity, your family, where you come from, we don't like you. And I think look at the in Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe and all his crew. They were going down like burning down homes and of white families who were innocent. Maybe some of them had done bad things, whatever. But like some bad people in any group. But there's wholesale appropriation of property and burning down of homes, killing families. I believe this is what happened, as far as I understand it. Um, and think of that, like little kids just getting killed by like gangs because they were viewed as a kind of parasite or something, like, oh, we need to get rid of these people, they're like devils or whatever it is, um, and then so there's, I think the thing is realizing that all groups oppress each, and then in Africa, the slave trade, there were Africans were enslaving their fellow Africans and then selling them to the Europeans. At that time in history, the Europeans didn't control like Africa. They had little ports um, on the kind of west coast of Africa, and they would go there, and Africans would sell them other Africans, and then they would go and bring them to the New World, and they would use them basically to grow sugar, and then they would use that sugar to sell. How would it go? They would sell, I think, the sugar and maybe some other agricultural products, but mostly sugar to, I think, Europe. And Europe would use that wealth then, I think, well, they would make manufactured stuff, which they would like send maybe to both, Africa and the Americas. But there's kind of like a three-way thing of like agricultural production, slaves, and more manufactured goods. And so there's this, dark economy built up on slavery, but it was, Africans enslaving other Africans. So what, are they just the victims? They're also the oppressor, no? And also sending them over to Arabia and, as slaves. And slavery has existed everywhere throughout time, more or less. And the first, I believe the first country which abolished it, there may have been others. I don't know in like ancient, I don't like certain cultures. Maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if there's exceptions. But in more modern history, the British Empire were the one, and hey, they were doing terrible things in Ireland, like basically genocided my ancestors, right? And basically intentionally took away our language and traditions and freedom systematically, like the British Empire did. And you can still see the trauma in the modern limits, and it's very sad and tragic. In Ireland's wonderful, but I feel like I can see all these ways in which we're still limited and burdened by the momentum of that trauma. And nonetheless, I can say that, yeah, the British Empire, they abolished slavery. They were the first major empire to abolish slavery in the modern world. And they said, no, we're not doing this anymore. And then, it spread around the world. So, and but then nonetheless, slavery is abolished in theory, but in practice, uh, you know, incredibly, like right now, there are more slaves alive today than ever existed during the whole history of the slave trade to North America. Um, and so, that's not, I, I guess the population of the world's bigger now. So more population density, bigger cities and all that. So that kind of accounts for it a bit. But yeah, there's enormous number of people who are enslaved now. But say you'll, have people, and I'm not trying to, point fingers or make anyone feel bad, but just to generate awareness here. There's people who talk about like how America's such a racist country, but they never mention, oh yeah, or go try and help, situations in the slavery that exists in India or in, I don't know, Indonesia um, or even the USA, but for like, my immigrants who are, or Ukraine or whatever, child trafficking, and so it's just this obsession with, the part historical slavery that fits some sort of narrative of like, we're better than you, you're defending the white America, this anti-traditionalist cult kind of thing, which might make you feel like, oh, just and, cool, but it's like the that society right now legally, apparently, Nigerians and whatever are doing great in the USA, and people of other races or ethnicities can and do move to the USA and thrive. So how is that like a white supremacist country if that's allowed to happen? That's very different to South Africa back in under apartheid, or Nazi Germany, or whatever, or um, Australia back in under the White Australia policy. Um, so these things just weren't allowed. There was systematic oppression. So we need to, be real and say, that's not the case anymore. And for sure, there's going to be momentum and people who are still racist, but that's only going to get worse if you judge everyone and say, oh, all white people are racist. And, kids are being taught in America, like, and probably in other places, but this like critical race theory thing, like being like getting like little kids, being like dividing the room up into oppressors and oppressed by going, all right, so you're half African American and half white. Okay, so you'll be half oppressor, half oppressed. You're full black. Okay, so you're good. You're just a victim, right? So good for you, and there's nothing you can do. You won't be able to get ahead in this society because it's a white supremacist society. The people who are literally talking like this to children, and oh yeah, and Tommy over there, okay, you're fully white. All right, so you're an oppressor. So you need to think about what you did or what your ancestors did. So, oh, I'm Irish. I was genocided by the British. Like, like, oh, don't interrupt. Whatever his name was. And so you can see like but then there's also, that's race, right? But then there's, gender stuff, or sex, the term I would prefer. And so, sexism, like definite sexism against women, definite sexism against men, like, people in, um, but of course, human beings, no one's perfect, certain number of, bad eggs on both sides are gonna judge people for anything that they can, whether it's like, oh, you're different to me. All right, I'll judge you. Or I had a bad experience with a man or with a woman. All right, I'm going to judge you for it and see them in you, and then you have, homophobia, people being judged for, the way that they, who they're attracted to and how they want to express their sexuality. Or, and then you've got all these different categories, or, class, etc. And or, politics. And then you've got all these different uh, categories, and so they're all being multiplied by each other. And so there's this kind of thing going on, and you may not be aware of this, but this is like the woke intersectionality culture, which is taking like the world by storm, getting in, very much ingrained in universities, and then getting into the HR departments of corporations and stuff, and into the media. And so it's really a big problem, actually. And there's a lot of injustice going on, and bad things being done, and people losing their jobs, and things that just aren't true being put forth as truth, because of this imbalance. So this is a real injustice, right? That's a real thing. Overall, everything's perfect, it's just, but this is a thing that should be changed, and we can change. And but but the, so that it seems to me like, basically a culture of like blame, and it coming from a negative energy, of not grounded in love or respect, and actually ironically it's like in this modern culture in, say, the West, straight up bigotry isn't tolerated. And so it seems that to me that bigotry has found a way through the back door by pretending to be anti-bigotry and going, yeah, like there's this bigot, and he's like, oh, okay, oh, we can't be bigots anymore. We can't, go lynch people, and we can't, you know, shame the women if they, try to work and get a job, whatever. Um, okay, fine, yeah, cool, cool, cool. And then comes back like, hey, I've been really thinking about this, guys. Yeah, let's. How about we go like stone the anti-bigots. No, we go stone the bigots. And being like, instead of being like, okay, yeah, we're all on the level, being like, oh yeah, it's not just that, feminism, that women are equal to men. We're even more equal. We're better than men. It's like, well, wait a minute. Now you're judging people based upon their sex. That's sexism. You're becoming your own enemy. Luke Skywalker, you know, killing everyone, being like, yeah, I killed all the Sith, murdered them, chopped their bodies up and turned them into pies. And like, whoa, you kind of went dark there. You kind of turned into your enemy. You didn't win after all. And so it seems to me that, yeah, there's this kind of thing where before we get to kind of more the maturity of just actual justice, we've gotten to this period where there's still the remaining, often probably subconscious, but I think sometimes conscious and just, really dark, psychopathic, narcissistic, what do you call that? The dark tetrad or whatever. But yeah, which is basically scratching that itch for being a bigot, by attacking everyone who's saying, oh, you're not devoted enough to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Let's go round you up and have you shot. It's like, oh, interesting. If you were born in Nazi Germany, I wonder what you would have been doing if that's the kind of way you treat your fellow human beings. So yeah, oppression. There is real oppression in the world. Say, American empire invading sovereign countries for profit. Russia, seem invading other countries for their own interests. Saudi Arabia invading countries for their interests. All over the world, you see people doing these things. I don't so much see Americans or Russians or Arabs or men or women or straights or gays or whatever it is, or blacks or whites. It's just human beings doing this, and your group will have some influence upon your habits and your behavior and your perceptions, your beliefs and values. But we don't need any of that. We just look at what you do, the content of your character as expressed through speech and action, and that's how we sort things out. We don't. You can use certain things like, oh, okay, you're from this culture. Okay, so probably you're going to do this, I think. That's fine for like making your guesses. But in terms of actually like judging people or, and, kind of making laws or organizing society and businesses and, institutions, you can't be, having pre-crime like, oh, you're from this group, therefore this is the judgment. It's like, no, it's innocent until proven guilty, right? So, yeah. All right. Let's see those notes there. What do we got? Yeah. Right. So you have that splintering of groups. Yeah, where there's like, the oppression Olympics. Like, oh, well, I'm a one-legged lesbian, fairykin, whatever. And there's kind of this narcissism which can creep in. Where, and I mean, these people. There's real people who really like kind of do take this stuff pretty crazy. And so I don't want to, mock anyone. But it really does, like, there's like just human nature, this stuff can get spiral out of control. And so there's kind of this thing where people seem to be, unfortunately, victimhood is very addictive and tempting because you can feel without doing anything and just kind of slumping in your soul, you can kind of claim moral virtue. And that's really dangerous, it's like a little, success button. Press the button and you will be a success. Okay, beep. What does it do? Or, it spreads falsity and cultural degeneration. Oh, well, beep. I want to be a success. It's like, so it's a dangerous thing. And, I've, felt like a victim, and, I've had to deal with that in my life, like certain things feel, oh, woe is me. So I'm not above that, but, yeah. So, but people, saying, oh, I'm more oppressed than you. It's like, look, hey, everyone's got problems, and you might not even be aware. And someone could be like, oh, Jamie, like, what do you know about anything? It's like, well, you don't know my problems, and I don't need to parade it or whatever. But let's just say everyone has some experience of limitations and things which can cause them injustice, and things where you might feel like it's not fair, you're missing out, or other people have it easier than you, or they have better opportunities, but at the end of the day, you can't be competing with people that's toxic. It only causes you harm. So competing about who's more hard done by, it's better to just go, okay, how can I get myself and others up and moving and, growing? And it's not through, like perceiving the world as a bunch of groups who compete for power, and that's all. And there's this really dark mindset which is parading itself as love, and it's not love at all. You can feel it. It's it's a really sick culture, and yet it's helping us grow in awareness and find out, well, what is compassion? What does that really look like? And how is it that sometimes compassion is actually to say, hey man, what you're talking about is total nonsense. That's not true. And you might make someone feel incredibly anxious by saying that. And yet love and compassion might command you to say that, because it's in order to provide that cultural balance and that the conversation we need to have. And so I think we're learning that balance between masculine and feminine compassion, of the mother being like, you're perfect just as you are, and then the father being like, oh, come on, you can do better than that. And or the father saying, hey, not good enough, or that's not true, or you did this, consequences. The mother being like, it's all good, come on, stay together, and hey, being more aware of emotions, and hey, let's do this, and let's, so, but yeah, I think oppression Olympics is not the way to go. It's more the success Olympics and celebrating success, and those, like Adele, lost a bunch of weight, and people are, oh yeah, amazing, good for you, because she's getting healthier, she's going to have less, less apart from she's going to feel better in her body, and people are going to interact with her, I don't know, like, oh wow, good for you, you did a good thing, because it is a good thing, because you're healthier, you have lower risks for all these chronic diseases, less inflammation, your brain's going to work better. This is all scientifically proven. But then some people will go, oh, but you're going to make the fat people feel bad. Whoops, you shouldn't call them fat. The big people feel bad. It's like, hey, if you're overweight, I've been a little bit overweight, not a great deal, but in my life, so, okay, I can understand the temptation to, eat a bunch of food, or there might be certain reasons involved, or I can definitely empathize where maybe finding the motivation to kind of say, like, certain sources of pleasure can help balance out the pain in life, and kind of, that maybe sometimes we can't find a way to make the change. It's just frustrating. We can't get out of the groove we're in. I can definitely understand that from personal experience, but in other ways, but that lowest common denominator there. But at the same time, it's no good to people who are overweight if you say, oh no, it's totally fine, there's no difference. Well, actually, we know, like, yeah, a little bit's no big deal, but like in general, yeah, like if you have excess weight, it lowers your lifespan. It's gonna, affect, make it easier for you to get sick. Viruses and stuff are going to be more dangerous to you. And people are going to find you less attractive, because naturally people like, attracted almost always to kind of healthy bodies. And so, you can blame them, but I mean, well, so there's this thing where it's like, she did a good thing. And it's like, yeah, good for you. But then people go, oh, how could you do that? That's not fair. It's like, well, you shouldn't be saying that. It's like, well, there's a time and place to be like, no, you're great. You're beautiful, just as you are. But also, hey, I go running once a week. We can go meet in the park if you want. Why don't we do it? So there's a balance there. And I think it's important to celebrate success. But anyway, there's that balance. That's an example of justice. Like, where is the justice there? I would say it's more on, accepting people, but also pointing out the truth and not lying to each other just to make each other feel good. So yeah. And, with the whole thing of, okay, what else we got? Like, yeah, racism, victimhood, yeah, oppression, discrimination in the world. A really cool thing, I think, is realizing, okay, yeah, there are people who are oppressing us, and um, and yet you can understand that the people who are doing that, that's not a healthy human being. That's not an awake human being. Um, that is a human being who is out of touch with themselves, and who's out of touch with their heart, and who is actually not a happy person. They might feel happy, and I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some dark, elites who are into some occult stuff and they feel happy, but if they're not operating from love, they're not really happy. It's like someone who they think they are is maybe happy, but like, yeah, I think people who, whether it's someone who's being racist to another, or someone who's classist, some oligarch, controlling society and taxing people too much and being corrupt, and or it's sexist or whatever. You censors who are censoring people, getting them off of social media because they've got the wrong, quote unquote, wrong opinion. You can understand that, have the empathy that, yeah, these people are doing that because of their own trauma and because of their own intellectual and moral shortcomings, and that actually you don't need to punish them and get some revenge against them, because they're punishing themselves. Every moment lived as a bigot is a punishment, and so living the life of love is the only real reward, I think. And every degree to which you're separated from that peace and that joy and that love of just being connected with your human family, that's just an incredible suffering which they inflict upon themselves. And then, so, but then you might say, oh yeah, but there's a place for more punishment. And I don't know, I think, I don't know about that, but yeah, maybe there is a place, people doing certain crimes being like, okay, your soul's immortal, but you're going to get executed. Oh, you've been doing a bunch of terrible crimes. We want to deter that in future. Okay, execution. I don't know. Like, there's always the case of that, like if 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 is wrong, then we shouldn't be killing anyone. And maybe that's a good point. But then you could also make the case like, we're keeping them in, a cage their whole life. Then taxpayers have to pay for that. Is that fair? But I think probably, like it'd be a small number of people who are actually doing terrible crimes. And then, but I think in general, you want to lean towards mercy. And but yeah, but consequences, yeah, like if people do things wrong, being sent to prison, or having some sort of consequence as a deterrent, definitely, I think that makes sense. Like to say, okay, we want to make sure people don't do this in future, so have some consequences. But then as punishment, like, oh, you did wrong, I think ultimately, it's very deep, but I don't know if they actually had the free will over that, or if that's like they were just out of control, they're just asleep, their soul wasn't at the wheel. So maybe it's all just about rehabilitation and just protecting others. So put them in prison so other people are safe, and try to rehabilitate them and treat them, see the rehabilitated person within them, speak to the soul within them, rather than reinforcing, oh, you're the criminal, you did this, that's who you're going to stay if you're talked to that way. But so, and then, so yeah, I guess there's a little bit of thoughts about justice, but then, the justice system, in private prisons in America, there's this incentive to have people imprisoned. And the Innocence Project is this thing where these lawyers and people are working to prove this seemingly a huge number of people in the USA who are imprisoned falsely on, and, the procedures weren't followed properly, or there wasn't enough evidence, or they just made a decision, but it was wrong, and more evidence has come up. So they're trying to, and they are successfully, and in at least in some cases, bringing people out of prison who have been put there wrongly, which is an amazing thing. There's a few, yeah, you could look that up if you want. But also, it seems like there's these vested interests. Like one of the main groups who lobby against the legalization of marijuana in the USA is prison guard unions. And I don't know in other countries, but I think it's probably going to be the same. But because an enormous number of people in the USA are in prisons because of just having possession of marijuana. So, which is insane because it's just a plant, and alcohol is far more dangerous. So you can see that's an injustice. It should be corrected. I think, other injustices, well, the over legalization of society, like, oh, you have a cliff and you need to put up a sign saying, don't jump off this cliff. Or you have a product and it's, like paint for the wall, and you have to put on there, do not drink. Or else it's like, oh, why is this there? This word's gone crazy. Well, but if they didn't do it and someone drank it, they could get sued. Oh, that makes sense then. Yeah. Wait a minute. What's the legal profession doing? Why are the judges thinking that's reasonable? Shouldn't they just be like, no, clearly the average person would know or should know that you shouldn't be drinking paint. So that's not the paint maker's fault. That's maybe the parents' fault, or that's your fault for not, sorry, but maybe even if some people are just very, simple and unintelligent, and their souls are equal to anyone else, but say as they're experiencing life through this body, their brain, can't compute information as efficiently, and they might make stupid decisions sometimes, no judgment, just that's, a fact. There's a range of intelligence. If those people encounter problems, like we should try to help them, but you shouldn't be penalizing everyone else for the consequences of one's own choices. So I think I would feel like, well, shouldn't the system just be, yeah, oh, you jumped off the cliff and you got injured. Okay, no, we don't need to put up these ugly signs in front of the beautiful cliff saying don't jump off, or things that just make people feel like we're in the whole world is being treated like children, like don't drink the paint. So that would be a thing where I think the over legalization of society, where it seems like lawyers have, and judges have gotten, who are lawyers, right? Their fingers in kind of everything, being like everything's so strictly controlled, and I think it seems out of balance. And where to start a business, and then in government, incredibly bureaucratic and legalized as well. Legalized, yeah, whatever. So whatever the word would be there. But yeah, so I think probably a simplification of the justice system would be good. But so other cases of injustice, well, I mean, and these are just examples where I'm, kind of saying these are some of the things in our world which are not fair and they should be changed. But this is all within that bigger picture I was mentioning before of like everything's groovy, everything's great. But say, what we're doing to pollution, right? The plastic in the ocean, to make glass, only certain types of sand can make glass. Based sand from riverbeds, oceans, seas, that kind of thing, lakes, not just sand in the middle of the desert. And so there's actually a shortage of that around the world, and so enough to the extent where it's quite valuable. And so you have all these mafias in like third world countries digging up beaches and destroying like local communities, in order to take the sand and sell it so they can turn it into glass. And whatever price that's going to fetch, wherever it's going to be used, they can make good money and it's worth their while to do it. So that's not good. And people worrying about global warming, it's like, okay, there's some issue to think about there for sure, but it's really dangerous where it seems like it's this one-sided thing. It's like that's the only problem. It's like, look, what about all the sand which is being dug up to make glass? When did you hear about that mentioned by Greta Thunberg or whatever? Or Amazon gets quite a bit of talk. That's good. That, you know, like that's insane what's being done there. Um, the plastic in the oceans. What about, you know, pharmaceutical industry, all the pharmaceutical drugs which seem wildly overprescribed, and from an industry which has been found guilty of fraud countless times. And the largest criminal fine in US history was to Pfizer, right? Like, I can't remember how much, but insane, like more than $1 billion, something huge amount, fine for criminal conduct. No one went to jail, interestingly, but the company was fined and they still make a profit overall, which is insane. So you can kill people and make a profit, but and not no one goes to jail. But nonetheless, you know, there's pharmaceutical drugs in the water supply because they're just so overused all around the place. There are GMO seeds which are planted and then they spread into the neighbor's field, and the neighbor gets no compensation when they now have their organic certification removed. And the neighbor's just like, oh, da 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 da, going about using my GM things. There's no consequence there. You don't have to stop using GMO because you've threatened their sovereignty. Now you've taken away their livelihood and their freedom to pursue natural organic production of food. The charities who, you know, 90 or 95% of their money is just goes to the overheads and people just whining, dining and doing whatever, apparently not getting the money to the actual people who need it. International aid, which seems to be fraught with rot, and you know, people just skimming off the top, and, you know, dodgy regimes just selling the food, keeping the money. I mean, what happened during the COVID era with, you know, oh, not a whisper about vitamin D or an active lifestyle or the Wim Hof method, or, you know, the benefits of social contact on the immune system, or, you know, fresh air and sunlight, and all this stuff, or the fact that masks don't work. They knew that, and then they're like, well, but maybe we can't be totally sure. And then they studied it more, like, okay, yeah, don't work. But still, you still see signs on the trains here saying, yeah, wear your mask. And so, and people being stigmatized and having their careers, you know, being, oh, you can't work unless you take this experimental pharmaceutical intervention, which has been trialed for like a few months at the most. And normally they need like a decade to make sure it's safe, so you don't have like cancer. And then now you have the enormous rises in myocarditis, heart inflammation, directly attributable to these vaccines or gene therapies. Technically, they're not vaccines. Different technology, but they use the same name for it, possibly to make it more marketable and acceptable to people. But so these are all injustices, and the fact that people had their freedoms taken away and were treated dishonestly, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, whatever. I did a whole episode on that, COVID number 19. But, you know, that's injustice. So there are countless, I guess I won't just go list every injustice I can think of, but there's so many, you know. But I think the key thing is just like we need to understand that everything ultimately is good, but at the same time, paradoxically, we can and we should work to improve it. And this gets to something I want to talk about, definitely, which is, well, why should we care if, you know, why is it that suffering, you know, should be alleviated? And I think on one level, the simple answer is just because intuitively it feels wrong. You know, you see a baby crying, you know, and, you know, oh, the baby is sick, like, or there's, you know, someone who had this dream and then a war breaks out in Ukraine and now they can't have their bakery that they wanted to open, and you know, oh, the person they were gonna, you know, they loved is now sent away to the war and gets killed or traumatized, and they're not the same person anymore and they can't even have a relationship, and swap out Ukraine for Yemen or Afghanistan or Libya or Xinjiang or province or whatever. So that's, these things aren't you know, you just know, like, that's wrong. It doesn't feel good, right? And so no smoke without fire. That's one thing, all right? Whereas you could say, and then also traditionally, you know, the stories of traditional, a lot of things we do through trial and error. Or what food can we eat? Are you going to go and try all the blueberry, all the berries on the plants and risk death? No, but thank God our ancestors did that for us, and we have this folklore and we have this culture of an understanding of how to operate in the natural world. So you have nature and then culture nested on top of that, and then your individual life nested on top of and within culture. And thank God for that, culture can be tyrannical, and so can nature, famines and cyclones, or, totalitarian regimes or religious orthodoxies or whatever. But then also they support us. And so there's that balance, which is something I think, say, circle back to the woke culture thing. They need to appreciate it. It's like, there's a lot of beautiful stuff in the traditions, and you can't just throw that away. You need to be very careful before you throw things away. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. But so intuitively and then traditionally, it's clear that, the amelioration of suffering, or the alleviation of suffering is a worthy thing to do. Now, a nihilist can go, yeah, but I mean, like, think about it. It's all just protons, electrons, neutrons. You can't prove that God's real or the soul's real. Where's the evidence? So, I think we're all just animals and nothing matters, and I can do whatever I want. And what's the point of it anyway? Like, okay, well, I agree. Well, I would say, meditation is a proof. If you go deep enough, it is a proof of the existence of God. You realize you are part of God, and consciousness is present. If this was an illusion, how would the illusion be aware of itself? That doesn't make any sense. Consciousness. In order for me to say, yep, nothing exists, there must be something which exists to notice the lack of existence. So that just doesn't make, in the most generous I could be, it's extremely unlikely that that argument makes sense. So that's one thing. But then also I could say, yeah, all right, let's take that seriously. Let's say, okay, yeah, there is no proof of God, or, free will, or love, or selfhood, or right and wrong, or anything like that. Okay, so let's say there's no proof that these things exist. Where's your proof that they don't exist? Where's your proof that this natural sense we have that love is real, life is real, the soul is real, people are real, we're all here. Where's your proof that this is wrong? Oh, you don't have proof. You have your theory. I have my theory. At the most generous to you, we're even. And the most, being even slightly generous to me, you have to admit that you basically talking nonsense, and it doesn't make much. Not making a very coherent argument, because there's so much, meditation. You can, there's that whole thing about, and psychedelic drugs, medicines, or whatever. You can have this experience of divinity. You can understand, get outside your mind, and through meditation you can get there. Of course, it's more sustainable, but I think both are useful. But at the conceding everything I could concede to you, you're still 50-50, right? That, you say everything's meaningless. I say, well, everything's meaningful. And we have an equal amount of evidence, if I'm being very charitable to you. So why would we lean, if it's 50-50, why would we lean your way, which history has proven leads to just chaos and boring, lack of bounty, lack of flourishing, lots of things which you in your personal life try to avoid, such as discomfort. And it just feels wrong intuitively. Why wouldn't we lean the way of smiling babies and blooming flowers and incredible artwork being painted and clean rivers and summer days in functional, prosperous societies where people are going about the adventure of learning and growing and sharing time and space? If it's 50-50, why should we go your way of just this desolate, dark, conflict-ridden, likely apocalyptic, and most of all, boring path? So I think even if you're not going to go with the intuitive and traditional and even logical reasons for the importance of, being ethical and alleviating suffering from our brothers and sisters, and basically just believing in love and taking love seriously and not just go, oh, love, that chemical, you idiot. Like, you realize how incoherent you are, like, even if we don't take those things, it's only 50-50. You say there's no proof of love. I can say there's no proof, there's no love. And we're at an impasse. So what is it? What's that extra thing which would make you lean the other way? So I'd say that's where justice, you need to take justice seriously, and honor and nobility all come with that. These things which have kind of become passe or whatever, unfortunately, but unfortunately in a way, because I think it makes them more precious, and it makes you notice people who are really paying attention, people who believe in nobility and courage and honor and valor and goodness and virtue. These are beautiful things, and they're basically the devotion to love, more or less, I think. And so, yeah. Let's see there. Yeah. So yeah, and I would say, by the way, that applies to nihilists who like, oh, no, nothing matters, but also to supremacists and like ideologues, people who are like, oh, I believe in right and wrong, but I just believe that we need to kill all this group, or that this group is not, they're just animals, they're not on the same level. But, okay, I'd say the same thing applies, saying, well, you've got this theory and I have my theory. Where's your evidence? Let's weigh it up. I would say intuitively, tradition, with the historical evidence of tradition and what works, what's been found to be functional, and then just even logic, getting into the depths of it there, the little nitty gritty. The evidence is way on the side of love. So why just lean this way? Come on, pal. Just come here. Let's have a hug, bring it in, bring it in. So yeah, all right. Now there's a great poem which I'm going to finish with here, which is well, it's not a poem actually. I think, well, I guess it is. It's part of The Merchant of Venice, Edward de Vere slash Shakespeare. So if I can get it right here, it's the quality of mercy. Oh, so it's talking about the balance between justice and mercy. And interestingly, in this sense, it's justice as the justice of the sword, or justice as the, cleaving away that which is inappropriate. And consequences, enforcing things with consequences. Say people who say, oh, there's all these people who lied or made mistakes, and demonize the people, say, during this COVID era, who were trying to sound the alarm and say, hey, this is really bad for the kids. They're not seeing faces. This is messing up. And now we see the evidence for this, COVID babies or whatever, where they're like, yeah, they're just a little bit behind schedule in development. Yeah, people were saying that the whole time. That was going to happen. We knew that was going to happen. And there's all, countless things like that, where there's all these tragedies coming. And that's just one thing. I'm taking an example, right? A little spicy, more contemporary example of justice. There's people saying, yep, people need to go to prison. There need to be consequences for this, because people have betrayed the public, and they've betrayed their oaths, and they have been criminally incompetent. So it's negligence or it's corruption. Either way, there need to be consequences. Both, some people would feel like to punish. I don't think punishment's necessary or wise. I think, but in terms of and rehabilitation is really a better idea. But or trying to that. But protection. So people who are dangerous and could cause more problems, we need to be protected from them. Limits need to be put upon their freedom, whatever's appropriate, to ensure that they don't cause further problems. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That kind of thing. And yeah, deterrent. So that's fair enough. Say, okay, let's make sure people don't try and do this again. So protection from repetition of the imbalances, and then also deterrent from, I guess you could say it's kind of a similar thing, right? Fair enough for that, I would say. But there's some people saying, yeah, put them in jail, or others like, oh, no. We were all under stress, it was hard to know what was going on. It's like, well, you should have been paying attention, and you were demonizing. It's not just, oh yeah, these people who don't want to go along with everything, they don't want to get a vaccine. I respect their freedom to make that decision. That would be one thing. But I think we need to do this. But the general prevailing culture was like, oh my God, these people are insane. How could they do it? And making fun of them, deriding them, demonizing them, pulling them off of social media, all kinds of and not just about vaccines, but many aspects of this, of what was going on. Um, and so, you know, that's the question. Do we err on the side of justice or mercy? And this is just one question. It applies in all kinds of topics. But acceptance of our brothers and sisters as, yeah, all right, you know, we're all God's children. We're doing our best to do our best to do our best, or whatever. Or do we go, yeah, all right, consequence time, and you know, the gardener needs to trim here and there to grow the beautiful garden. And so anyway, this is kind of speaking to that dynamic and that balance from old mate Shakespeare. So the quality of mercy be not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that receives. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attribute to awe and majesty. But mercy, wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings? But mercy lies above this sceptred sway. It is enthroned in the heart of God himself. And what is it? And mortal, no, I can't remember, what was it? And mortal men doth, no, that's not it. And earth doth, I'll make it up. And earth doth then look likest heaven when mercy seasons justice. Something like that, the last line, I can't remember, but you get the idea. So I think, you know, at the end of the day, yeah, justice, we should go about that. But at the end of the day, remembering the love and that we're all together, you know, and that everything ultimately is already perfect, and that this system is just the natural flow of the Big Bang continued. The free will which created the Big Bang is continuing to create anytime you become still and align yourself with your soul and become one with the totality and allow it to express through you, as you, with you. And that, yeah, it's a beautiful play of, you know, this and that. And but yeah, so I think, but it's a beautiful thing to have that balance, that I guess, and this is what I think we need to do, balance, we all need to do, balance that awareness of the perfection of things, which gives that reassurance and that peace, with then the motivation to go out and kind of do things and kind of express beauty into the world, and in a balanced way. So you're not being lazy or lazy or what's the word I'm looking for? I can't find the word, but lacking in conscientiousness, right? Not being careful enough. So being able to balance that and actually take care of your responsibilities, you know? So they're my thoughts on justice. So I appreciate your patience, very kind of you, while I periodically search for words. But hope you found that interesting. And yeah, may we all be noble, and may we all balance the awareness of the perfection of this wonderful life we get to live, with also kind of contributing our nobility and putting our, what's it in the words of John Lennon, putting our soul power to the karmic wheel. So much love, everybody.